The Salem Witch Trials. Here's the table of contents. In this book, you will read about the Salem witch trials from 3 perspectives. Each perspective is based on real things that happened to real people who lived in or near Salem Village in 1692. As you'll see, the same event can look different depending on one's point of view. Chapter 1, John Barrow. He's the minister. Evil lurks among us. The first signs of the devil's work appeared in Salem Village just a few months ago, in late January 1692. Salem Village is in Massachusetts Bay Colony. The village is only 3 miles from where I live in Salem Town, but the two places could not be more different. Salem Village is a rural community of 600 people and even more livestock. Salem Town is a city formed around a large seaport. A report of the evil that began in Salem Village quickly found its way to my door. I received an urgent letter from the minister of Salem Village in early February. Reverend Samuel Parris had been the pastor of the Salem Village Church for just 3 years. His letter was brief. He wrote that a terrible illness had fallen upon his house. He begged me to provide my opinion on the matter. Reverend Parris's house was in an uproar when I arrived. His 9-year-old daughter, Betty, and his 11-year-old niece, Abigail Williams, were both afflicted with uncontrollable fits. The girls screamed as their bodies twisted into impossible positions. They complained of bites and pinches on their arms and legs. I asked Reverend Parris if he had sent for a doctor. He said he had. The doctor said there was nothing he could do. The doctor had not found any physical cause for the girls' distress. He believed the problem was spiritual in nature, caused by demons or other evil beings. But where had it come from? The girls eventually calmed enough to answer the question for me. Reverend Parris owns 2 slaves, Tituba and John Indian. According to Betty and Abigail, one afternoon at the end of January, Tituba was going to predict the future for Betty, Abigail, and some of her friends. Betty and Abigail reported that Tituba created a homemade crystal ball by dropping an egg white into a glass of water. As the egg white sank into the water, one of Betty's friends saw the outline of a coffin in the glass. All the girls immediately went into hysterics. Betty and Abigail had been afflicted ever since. Fortune-telling is a crime and a sin in our culture. Only God has the right to predict future events. We believed the young girls instead of Tituba, a slave. She must have been under the influence of a satanic power. Whether she meant to harm the girls or not, her actions brought disease and despair to this community. Tituba is a witch. We are not immune to witchcraft in the colonies. For centuries, the devil has used witches to spread disease and suffering, hoping to destroy the kingdom of God. We believe illness and events that cannot be explained. Sudden blindness, the death of an infant, a failing crop, can be signs of the devil's work. So over here you have the clergy members praying for the afflicted girls. And then this little note says, second source, find another source that describes the illnesses of Reverend Parris's daughter and niece and compare the information. Until now, witchcraft in the colonies has been somewhat rare. While several witches have been accused, it wasn't until 1647 that the first witch was hanged for her crimes. There have been only a handful of convictions since. I suspect there will be more to come. There's a picture. The caption says, the girl's story implied that Tituba was a witch. Page 9. Tituba is not the only accused witch in Salem Village. 5 other girls in the village came forward shortly after I visited Reverend Parris's home. They complained of the same pains, had unexplainable fits, and spoke of seeing bright lights, small animals, and people without faces by the end of February. 3 people had been named as witches. Tituba was the, we'll continue that on the next page. It says, test for the bewitched. Some people in Salem village used witch cake to determine whether a person was under the influence of a witch. Barley meal was mixed with urine from the afflicted person. The dough was shaped into a small cake and baked. Then it was fed to a dog. If the dog acted strangely, then the person who had provided the urine was bewitched. But Reverend Paris and others believed this type of test was witchcraft too. Okay, so then continuing on, it says Tituba was the first. 2 other women in town, Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, were also accused. The trials began in June. People from far and wide came to watch the proceedings, myself included. The accused were questioned, and then witnesses came forward to testify against them. The afflicted girls, overcome with pain and sometimes suffering from deafness or violent fits, were often unable to testify. They remained in the courtroom, though, and the sight of these young women thrashing about and screaming words of nonsense was deeply disturbing. Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne denied the charges of witchcraft, but Tituba confessed that the devil had come to her and forced her to work for him. Furthermore, Tituba claimed that she was in a coven with both Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne. All 3 women were sent to jail. I had hoped that the matter would be put to rest once the 3 women had been found guilty. Instead, the afflicted continued to name even more witches. Local religious leaders gathered to discuss a way to end the afflicted girl's suffering. Disease is often a punishment from God for sins we have committed. So those in Salem village decided to do a village-wide fast to make amends for their sins. During the fast, villagers stayed in their homes and refrained from working and eating. If these sacrifices were pleasing to God, the punishment would end. The fast lasted for 10 days. It did not work. More and more people are joining the ranks of the afflicted in the courtroom, and the accusations of witchcraft are coming quickly now. I once watched in horror as girls ripped at their hair and beat their chests. Now I worry about those who have been accused. Just last week, Rebecca Nurse, a most valued member of Salem Village Church, was convicted of witchcraft. Many people signed a petition stating she was innocent. The jury first found her to be innocent, but the judges asked them to reconsider. They found her guilty, and Sister Nurse was sentenced to death. I find it hard to believe that such a good woman could be an instrument of the devil's work. Reverend Paris made it clear to his congregation and anyone can be overcome by satanic forces, even the religious. But the evidence brought against Sister Nurse included only the shrieks of her accusers and their tales of spectral visions. I am of the mind that such spectral evidence should not be given credit, but I shall keep that to myself. Those who side with the accused often find themselves on trial as well. We have this picture of the accusations of witchcraft come at an increasingly fast pace. Chapter 2, Patience Dodd, an accused witch. Bridget Bishop and Sarah Good are dead. Rebecca Nurse, Elizabeth Howe, George Jacobs, and John Proctor are dead too. They were hanged in front of the rest of the town. It is the end of September 1692 since the trials began. In June, 19 people have been convicted of witchcraft and sent to the gallows. Will I be next? I am not a witch. I know that for certain. I have never spoken with the devil and never tried to harm another soul. Yet here I am, wearing leg irons and in prison until my trial. Every day, more men and women file into this overcrowded, filthy jail. The only ones who leave are headed to the gallows. I came to prison shortly after Ann Putnam, Jr. accused my older sister Mary of being a witch. Anne is a vile 12-year-old girl. She has accused no fewer than 68 people of serving the devil. She makes it sound as if witches line up outside her door just for a chance to curse her. Anne and her friends, a gang of spiteful girls, all afflicted in one way or another, taunted my dear sister throughout her trial. They interrupted her testimony with shrieks and seizures, calling for her specter to stop tormenting them. Those on trial are not allowed many rights. They cannot have legal defenders, nor are they allowed to have witnesses testify on their behalf. But they can question their accusers. Mary called Anne up to question her. The young girl was suddenly struck dumb. It was as if she could no longer see, hear, or speak. My sister, concerned about the girl, reached out and touched her shoulder. "Witch!" Anne cried, suddenly coming back to life. "Mary Dodd is a witch." You see this picture, there's a caption that says, "Even young children accused people of witchcraft." All right. It says, "A loud murmur filled the room. I could not let my sister go undefended. I fought my way to the front of the courtroom. I said there was a guilty party in the room, but it was not my sister." Anne fell to the floor. Her body quaked as she moaned in pain. "Witch!" Another of the afflicted girls cried. "I saw Patient Dodd's specter attack poor Anne." My arms were seized by 2 guards. I was dragged to jail, where I have been for about 2 months. I now understand why so many men testify against their wives. Defending a loved one against accusation of a witchcraft only make you an easy target for the afflicted girls. I am not the first or last person who attended a trial as a spectator, and left as a prisoner. There are 100 people here in the Salem Village Jail. Our cramped quarters are cold and dark, and the lack of windows makes my small cell feel like a dungeon. The air stinks of human waste and tobacco. It is difficult to find an appetite for the small amount of food and water we are given. 4 people have died from the horrible conditions. In this little box it says the Mathers. 2 notable clergymen gave guidance during the 1692 witchcraft crisis. Both Harvard University President Increase Mather and his son Cotton publicly supported the trials, but Increase did not think testimonies about dreams and visions should be allowed in the courtroom. In October 1692, Increase wrote, "It were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than 1 innocent person be condemned." Over here, here's a picture of Cotton Mather, that was a clergyman. And then it continues on to say, "The jail is expensive. We are charged for every day spent here. Bedding and food are extra. We are even forced to pay for our leg irons. I worry about what Mary and I will do if we manage to escape the gallows. We have no money to pay our prison bill. The sheriff will most likely take our meager possessions and maybe even our home. We will be left with nothing. I must find a way to save myself and my sister. Proclaiming our innocence does nothing to sway the judges. Every single person who has been hanged so far has claimed their innocence until the very end. I refuse to take part in the trial. That will not help either. Giles Corey would not answer any of the judge's questions. They pressed him to death with heavy stones. The only ones who live are those who admit to witchcraft. Many of them, like Tituba, have gone to court to testify against others. They remain in jail between trials. While they aren't free, they are still alive. I know I have been falsely accused. The same must be true for at least some of the others. Yet they have taken blame in order to survive. Should I lie, like I suspect Tituba did, and say that I'm a witch to save my own neck? Or should I, like the 19 already hanged, declare my innocence as the heavy rope tightens around my neck? I do not have much time to decide. There are murmurs of unease in our village and the surrounding towns. People are getting angry about executions. I am not sure how the judge will react. Will they kill us to rid the town of the devil, or will we be released and left to pick up the pieces of our lives? Chapter 3. Martha Smart. She is an accuser. The entire town thought I was bewitched. Looking back, I don't think I was. I was 14 years old in 1692. My parents had just died from illnesses, so my uncle took me in. I was treated like a servant. I cleaned, cooked, fed the pigs, and watched my young cousins. My uncle was not a wealthy man, and he had already had 4 children of his own. I was a burden to him and my aunt, and they mostly ignored me. It was an unpleasant life, but it was the lot I had been dealt. I became ill with a fever and terrible stomach pains in January 1692. When the fever was at its worst, I had visions of a tall, thin, black man beckoning me to follow him. I was terrified to tell my uncle for fear that he'd accuse me of making up stories and throw me out of the house. I suffered alone until my cousin brought news from the village. Other girls had the same stomach pains and fever from which I ailed. There were even hushed whispers about visions just like mine. Doctors said these symptoms were caused by witchcraft. My uncle thought otherwise. He said my illness was a punishment for my sins. The only way I would return to health was to go to church. I'll never forget the events one Sunday. My fever had cooled, and I looked forward to the sermon. Halfway through the service, Betty Paris's cousin Abigail stood up and began naming people who had bewitched her. The accused were taken to jail, while other girls added their voices to Abigail's. They clawed at their skin, moaning that they had been tortured by the accused people's specters. The entire congregation was riveted by the scene. When the girls' fits ended, both relatives and strangers rushed to their sides. They comforted the afflicted girls and vowed to punish those responsible. I fell into a deep sleep when we returned to the house. Hours later, I woke screaming, plagued by the nightmares of the tall black man. My cousin rushed into the room, but she could not comfort me. My uncle joined us. I was babbling, making very little sense. My uncle looked into my eyes with the care of a father. How I had longed for such attention from him. He asked what demon had bewitched me. I named the first person who came to mind, Sarah Good. Sarah Good was well known in Salem village for all the wrong reasons. She was a homeless beggar who smoked a pipe and was rude to people who offered her charity. I had never spoken to her in my life. My uncle thundered from the house in search of Reverend Paris while my aunt and cousin helped me into bed. I never before known such tender care and affection. My chores were put on hold day after day while doctors and ministers visited my bedside to ask about my visions and how I was feeling. They listened to my every word. I began to feel better over the next few weeks, but I didn't want the attention to stop. I continued to complain of aches and hallucinations while my aunt held my hand and prayed. I didn't like lying, but the thought of suddenly losing their affection was more than I could bear. The trials began in early June. I was completely recovered by this time, but a group of village elders convinced my uncle that I should attend the proceedings with the rest of the afflicted girls. Ann Putnam Jr. was the ringleader in the courtroom. I was unsure how to act, so I followed her lead. We made fun of the accused by mimicking their actions. We screamed and flailed our limbs. People were listening to us for the first time in our lives. What we said actually mattered. The power was thrilling, but the things were spiraling out of control. The hanging started on June 10th. Bridget Bishop was the first. She owned a tavern and never had anything nice to say about anyone. Her death cleared the way for more and more outcasts to be accused, convicted, and sent to jail. One by one, they were dragged to the gallows in a wooden cart and put to death. It all happened so quickly. It felt like adults were pushing us to accuse more people. A sense of hysteria filled the village and spread to outlying towns. Nobody knew whom to trust. I no longer wanted to be a part of this, but it was too late. I had to continue. If my lies had been discovered, I would have been severely punished. Thankfully, Governor William Phipps stepped in before we could do any more damage. He stopped the trials on October 29, 1692. Some people say it was because the townspeople were so upset by the number of convictions and accusations. I think it was because his wife was accused of being a witch. Whatever the reason, I was glad it was over. Those still in jail under suspicion of witchcraft were tried in January of 1693 in a new court in Boston. Unlike the earlier trials, spectral evidence was not allowed in the courtroom. Only a few people were convicted, but they were eventually released with everyone else in May 1693. It has been 10 years since the end of the trials. Witchcraft no longer takes the blame for accidents and diseases here in Salem Village. No apology will ever undo the damage wrought in 1692. What I did in Salem Village all those years ago cannot be excused, but I hope it can be understood. We have a box here that says what really happened. Nobody knows exactly what caused the wave of witchcraft accusations in Salem Village. Some historians think it was due to disease called encephalitis. Encephalitis can cause pricking sensations, fits, and hallucinations. Others say the Indian Wars were to blame. Several of the accusers lost their families in these bloody battles and blamed others for the Puritans' failure. And some scholars blame the accusers of pretending to be ill just to get attention. Okay, then we have a couple questions, and you have your glossary, which is good. And you have your index and then about the author. You can use those for your text features part of your project. Hope you like the book.